I think the thing most people get lost in is their desire to be a CEO or the desire to be a leader with, is this the right moment in time, the right context for them? And sometimes that takes a moment to slow down the energy and the enthusiasm of being wanted, being liked, being asked to do the job with, is this what you want? And is this what the company needs? And that's critical because if either of those things are missing,
They say it's lonely at the top. They're right. But you don't have to scale your company alone. Welcome to the Scaling CEO. I'm Glenn Gow, the CEO Success Coach. On this podcast, I sit down with top performing CEOs to uncover the hidden patterns and frameworks behind their success so you can avoid common pitfalls and accelerate your company's growth. Now, on to the show. My guest today is Jason Baumgarten. His job is one of the most consequential in the business world. As the global head of the CEO and board practice at Spencer Stuart, one of the top executive search firms in the world, he's one of the key people the world's most influential companies call when they need to find their next leader. He describes himself as a dot connector, someone with a natural ability to see through the noise and align people, organizational needs, and complex situations. He believes that great leadership is what truly matters, and he's advised thousands of C-level executives on their journeys, offering a measured, facts-based perspective on what it takes to succeed, which is why we're listening to him today. He has a unique vantage point on what separates the CEOs who successfully scale, which is what this podcast is all about, from those who don't. For any leader listening, this conversation is a rare opportunity to get the inside view of where the biggest leadership decisions are made. Jason, it's great to have you on the podcast.
thanks for having me, Glenn.
You call yourself a dot connector, someone who aligns people, organizational needs, and situational requirements. From your perspective, what is the one dot that most scaling CEOs fail to connect until it's far too late?
That's a great question. I think the thing most people get lost in is their desire to be a CEO or the desire to be a leader with, is this the right moment in time, the right context for them? And sometimes that takes a moment to slow down the energy and the enthusiasm of being wanted, being liked, being asked to do the job with, is this what you want? And is this what the company needs? And that's critical because if either of those things are missing, you'll find out soon enough that either you really don't want to be in the role or you really don't want to be in the role in this particular company in this particular time. So that's the dot I always start with is why you, why now, why this company?
That's great. And Jason, I have to tell you, many times in my very first conversation with a CEO, they say to me, Glenn, I don't know if I want this job. This is way harder than I thought it was going to be. So I can relate to that perspective. Now, your work in CEO succession gives you a front row seat to leadership transitions. What's the biggest blind spot you see in highly successful, internally promoted leaders when they finally step into that top CEO job?
I think the thing that's most common is that leaders either cling too much to the strategy and the operating model and what was set before them, and they're still trying to play that enabler role to the former strategy, former CEO, or the pendulum swings all the way to the other side and they want to tear it all down, start again, do things totally differently. Organizations only have so much capacity for change. And so that as a new CEO, you need to be laser focused on what are you trying to get people to change? Because in our daily jobs, I always laugh. Many of us just did the iOS update. We're probably still trying to figure out where our missed calls are and our voicemails. Just imagine that at an epic scale in an organization. You suddenly have a new CEO. They're changing the strategy, the operating model, the metrics that matter, the comp plans, the organizational structure, your role, the culture. It's too much. And so I think for a new CEO, first is where on that pendulum do you want to be? And then two, recognizing that organizations can only absorb so much change. Now you have to balance that with what the organization needs. And if you're running out of money, you got to change a little faster than if you've got nice stable cash flows and growth. But irrespective, it's getting that sort of metronome of change right.
Yeah, I like that. And I also think about how much can the organization change over what period of time, right? If we're going to change personnel, we're going to change strategy, we're going to change culture, all those things are going to change, but how much can the company actually continue to succeed with given those changes? You help boards evaluate and identify top tier leaders. When a board is assessing if their current CEO is truly capable of scaling the company, what's the number one trait they look for that isn't on a financial statement?
It's a great question. I think there's two things that I'd point out. One is their ambition, that they have a big enough vision for what they want this organization, this company to become, because that's what creates followership, is that excitement of doing something great. The second thing, though, is a pragmatic ability to connect the financial results with what they're doing. There's a lot of busy executives. Nobody's ever short of busyness in our world. But when you ask somebody, why did the stock go up? Why did the revenue go up? Why did the profit margin go up? Why did your customer NPS go up? Why did your employee satisfaction go up? Do they know why? Can they connect the dots between what they're doing and the outcomes they're seeing? Or are you just getting the luck factor of the executive was there when good things happened and another executive was there when bad things happened, so we'll go with a lucky one? The reality is you really want an executive who can be humble and recognize where they did something that had a huge impact and where did they do something that really didn't work out so that they can learn from it and the next time round get even better at driving success.
Let's also talk about self awareness. I believe that any CEO, whether they're great or they're just a good CEO, always wants to improve. This is why I believe every great athlete in the world has a coach, not because they're not great already, but because they can get a little bit better from having a coach. But that aside, how do you think about a candidate and their self awareness so that they can grow into and beyond that role?
Yeah, the first thing is that self-awareness, but I think it is also the prioritization. Is this something that's critical path or is this something that's a nice to have? I think in our society we tend to think about all the things we can improve. I can always work out more, I can sleep more, I can be a better parent, I can be a better leader, I can be more empathetic and more hard driving. Really being clear about what is the thing that is holding you back right now that you have to improve, and much like that change monster with organizations, what is the first thing I need to work on before I work on the next thing? And so being able to prioritize in your own absorption of feedback, what is the thing that's holding you back right now from being on to unlock the next? The second thing is change requires intensity and duration. And so the first step may be awareness. The second is intensity duration. Coaching really helps with that awareness stage, what other people perceive you, what impact are you having on others, but a coach isn't living with you 24/7. They're not sitting in all your meetings. So what's also critical is that you own the fact that you're going to need some intensity and duration to change. If you want to change a lot, if you want to change a
Right.
little, you can have a little impact.
Sure. Now, you were the chair of the board at a nonprofit for 14 years. How did leading a mission driven nonprofit board change your perspective on what effective leadership and governance look like in the for profit world that you advise every day?
Yeah. I mean, first, I think every chair of a nonprofit deserves an award and a support group because it's really hard work, particularly those of us that navigated through COVID. I think that there's a couple things for-profit organizations can learn from the nonprofit world. One is why people show up to work. In for-profit organizations, we often think as money as the primary motivator, and it is an important one. We all work first and foremost to sustain our lives. But underneath that, there's a lot of other drivers. And I think that one of the things nonprofits often have to do, because they can't compete with the most well-paying private sector jobs, but they often need finance leaders and HR leaders and marketing leaders and operations leaders, is what levers can you pull to attract great talent that aren't just financial? And I think that's a really important lesson. I think the second thing is how do you get people's attention from a board perspective when it's not a financial arrangement? In fact, in many nonprofit boards, people are donating money as part of their board service. And so, how
Right.
do you really ensure that you're getting the best out of people? And what I've learned about board service is most people really want to help make an organization better. They want to get acknowledged. They want to get their feedback and their advice listened to. And so creating a culture where board members feel heard and listened, and that enough of that advice and counsel is acted upon is really important. I think for-profit leaders often have to think about how do they do that stakeholder management with the board so that board members feel listened to and that the advice and counsel is being absorbed and it isn't just a rubber stamp organization. And I think that those two lessons are probably the two that last with me the most. One is how do you really turbocharge a workforce when you can't just pay them more? And number two, how do you turbocharge a board when the relationship has to be on that trade of value add or impact that they're having.
Yeah, I really like the discussion about compensation and motivation. And for the people that you're dealing with at the CEO level, rarely is compensation the most important factor. I talk about autonomy and mastery and purpose uh, and acknowledgments as motivators. And CEOs rarely get that last one, which is acknowledgments. They rarely hear from the board, what a great job you're doing. Instead, they hear about, well, what are we going to do next quarter? How can we do even better? But in terms of motivating employees, I think it's really critical to understand there's a broad spectrum of things that motivate people. It's not just go pay them more to help them work harder or work faster. Now, before your current focus, you were a leader in McKinsey's technology practice. How does that deep background in tech and product strategy inform how you evaluate CEOs today, especially as every company is now becoming, in some ways, a tech company?
Yeah, there's two things. The first is I think every great talent decision, CEO the most so, the most so is linked to strategy. What is the company trying to achieve? What's changing in the context of the company? So we tend to think of ourselves as really driving strategy through leadership as opposed to there's a good leader and a bad leader. It's the leader who can bring the right approach to the company at that point in time. So that's the first thing is really that link to strategy. The second piece is technology. There's no doubt that every company has to embrace technology differently and at a faster clip. I think what that means is that it's no longer just the responsibility of if you're in a non-tech company, your IT team, and if you're in a technology company, your product and engineering team. The CEO ultimately has to be thinking about the technology opportunities and the technology disruption that can that can affect the company. And for most CEOs right now, it's really easy to take one of the extreme views that everything's changing and it's going to disrupt everything, or it's all pixie dust and it's going to fade away. The reality, and we can see this from the mobile boom of the mid 2000s or the internet boom of the late 90s, in both cases, the transformation in society and business and how we do things has been massive. In the late 1800s, the majority of workers in the US were in agriculture. Now it's less than 2%. So for the period of 100 plus years, you saw a massive change in how we think about producing one of the most critical um, products and services in our economy. The same thing will happen in other areas. It's just a question of pacing. How long will it take? How significant will it be? But I think for CEOs to keep true to first principles is really important. And particularly when we're seeing this level of disruption from technology, going back to first principles to say what could be disrupted? What is my competitive advantage? Is what I think my competitive advantage still an advantage? Or right now we saw the news today that one of the leading AI companies is hiring hundreds of investment bankers to learn the models of investment banking. Well, if your core competency is modeling deals, that becomes a risk because now I cannot have what this one team thinks, but I can have what the best practices are from every team in every organization. So I think we're all going to have to rethink what competitive advantages are, what competitive moats are, and that's going to impact CEOs in a different way than they've had to think about it for a number of years. But again, we've been through this before. The internet showed us as analogous a situation as possible. All those crazy ideas in 1995 through 2002 came true. Some of them just came true 10, 20 years later.
That's right. Well, let's talk about that pace of change, um, which is now unique and different with AI. Because I do believe people can change, they can adapt. However, I think this is very, very different. And I see it in my own work where some of my CEOs are AI first CEOs. And so that's what they think about and breathe all day long. And others are really reluctant or concerned about AI. So as AI becomes more capable of handling complex strategy and data analysis, how does that fundamentally change the job of the CEO? And how does it change how you work in terms of what you're looking for the right kind of CEO that can adapt very quickly to this massive, rapid changes happening with AI?
So I think about it on two dimensions. The first is how important is this to the company? So if you have a company that's um, really not going to be deeply affected by AI in the next 10 years, then the need of a CEO to be deeply expert in that area is fairly low. If you have a company that's AI first, their core product is selling an AI product, for example, they better be pretty up the learning curve. So the first question is the context. How important is this to the company at this point in time? The second is the individual. And on that axis, it really comes down to me, three things. One is, are they willing to do the hard work to figure out what could change? Two, are they willing to do the hard work to figure out what they need to learn? And then three, are they willing to do the hard work to push into the organization the changes that are required? I was recently talking to a CEO and he was telling me about all the things his IT team was doing. And I stopped him. I said, "What's your legal team doing?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, how's your legal team adopting AI?" He said, "They aren't." I said, "Well, maybe you need to think about that." Because the reality is, this isn't just impacting technologists, it's impacting every function, every way of working for some companies. And so for a lot of CEOs, if it is impacting broadly, they need to lead the way as being a learner. And then they need to change quite a bit about how they're operating from a management perspective and how they're embracing others to learn and to try and to fail, but also keeping those first principles true. You can't distort the math of business just because it's AI. You still need to make money and you still need to
Right.
spend a little less than you do on the cost of goods or cost of service. And that's where the economics sometimes get a little stranded in, you know, on a secret island.
Well, I have a slightly different perspective than you. Yes, I agree there's a spectrum of companies that'll be impacted by AI, some more than others. However, I want to use an example. I'm coaching the CEO of a manufacturing company right now, and they are not thinking about AI at all. But that's not how I coach. I want to introduce and push and nudge and create experiments with AI, even in manufacturing. And that's not typical early adopter, with possible exception of robots, not an early adopter of AI. And yet, we're finding many, many areas where it's going to have a significant impact on the strategy of this company and then the operations of this company. So I believe that every CEO needs to find a way where it's going to have the greatest impact before their competitors do. So, Jason, we are out of time, and I really appreciate you joining us today. Tell people how they can reach you.
Well, the best is follow me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to be in touch. I get a lot more requests than I can respond to. So apologies ahead of time if you send me a note and I don't reply, but please follow. And we try to put some great thought leadership out there every week. And if you have questions or comments, send them my way.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Glenn, for having me.
That's a wrap for today's episode of The Scaling CEO. If you found this valuable, be sure to like, subscribe, and share with a fellow CEO who could benefit. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give us a quick rating as it really helps more people find the show. I'm Glenn Gow, the CEO Success Coach. See you next time for more proven strategies to grow your business and leadership.